sometimes you just hit a wall. In the same way of like when you tell somebody, don't think of a purple elephant, and then right now you're visualizing a purple elephant, right? In a similar way, large language models can get that a little bit from a mathematical perspective, as you say, not to do something that showed up randomly as an error in its first attempt. Prompt engineering, but not prompt engineering in the way that you probably hear about it all the time, where it's trying to get the perfect one-time prompt that you can just copy and paste and get exactly what you want. Not only is that overkill, it's also a total pain and not necessary. There's actually a better way, and that's what we're going to focus in on today. When it comes to learning AI tools and how to use them at work, it's a little different than what we've learned in the past of how we create mastery of tools. 10,000 hours was what it took to become an expert in something. In the world of AI, to become a competent user, it's actually a lot easier than that. You only really need just 10 hours using these tools. And if you can push yourself through to actually do that work, you'll find yourself being more than just a beginner, but actually somebody who's getting value out of these things. And so if you can set aside that 10 hours and apply the things that we're going to go through in this session, you'll find yourself being up and forward as an actual AI user. And this number didn't come from me. This number came from somebody much more qualified than I am. Professor Ethan Molik, a professor at Wharton and the author of a book on how to work and collaborate with AI, who's a really, really great follow in the AI space. But his takeaway was that you just need to spend at least 10 hours with AI tools. I want to talk about the two types of prompting. And so I alluded to this at the very beginning, that there's two types of prompting. There's conversational prompting, which is what we're going to focus in today. And then there's engineered prompting, which is what most people mean when they say prompt engineering. So we're going to focus on the left-hand side of this equation. And the basic way to remind yourself, is it going to run without you? Is it going to happen on its own? If it's not, then you should probably be using conversational prompting, having a back and forth. Versus if it's going to run without you, you can't really have a conversation. So you need to actually engineer your prompt into something that is prepared and able to get you the results that you want consistently first time, every time, which is a high bar. So let's not try and jump it if it's not necessary. So today we're focusing on that conversational side of thing. But that doesn't mean that the things we're covering today aren't useful in both contexts. So there's a few cases where that applies quite strongly. And so I'll call that out by saying that it's equally applicable to engineered prompting. So you'll have that little reference at the bottom of the slide. Conversational prompting. Let's jump into what I would consider a 101, maybe even a 102 of conversational prompting. How to get beyond just the fact that you should have a conversation. First up, you don't need to one-shot it. You need to go backwards and forwards and have a conversation with the model. When I say the model and when we think about the context here, we're thinking about whatever AI assistant you want, whether that's ChatGPT, whether that's Claude, whether that's Gemini, whether that's Grok, whether that's an open source model. All these things equally apply. So you open up that chat window and start a conversation, you're now having conversational prompting in action. So if you hit a dead end, you can start and try again. You can try, fail, and try again. So here's an example. Let's say that you're looking for two examples for a presentation. The point being made is that you should converse with AI and not rely on getting the answer in one shot. I want to show an example of what I'm saying to do and a complementary example of what not to do. And then that doesn't work. You don't get exactly what you want. So you need to then ask a follow-up question. The trap is if you go and start a new conversation straight away, you just go, oh, I forgot about that. I knew I should have said, oh, this needs to be about ad tech. And this needs to be a brief example. You don't have to include all of that up front. Think of the things that do come to mind and include them. But everything you forget, which is always going to be plenty, because you shouldn't be spending hours writing an initial prompt in this context. You should just brain dump what you've got after doing a little bit of actual thinking, and then add in the extra context as you think of it. Second, context. Not only an important part of prompting, it's actually now evolving into its own discipline. If you've heard the term context engineering, that's really this taken to the extreme where you figure out the prompt first and then secondarily figure out all the ideal context that you want to provide, where you're going to get to it. But in a conversational prompting context, it's much simpler than that. You just want to think about what information exactly do you want to provide to the model? There is no implicit knowledge of who you are and what you're trying to do. It only has what you tell it and some vague representation of all the world's knowledge, which is where the power comes from. But you've got to give it direction on which part of that knowledge is actually relevant to the conversation. Memory is something that makes this a little bit easier over time, so you can build on the context that you've shared previously, but it might not come up. So rather than just saying to analyze the trends in a data set, you want to specify what type of trends. Let's focus in on the CPM. You want to focus in on what timeline. You can get even more specific. You can say that you want this CPM trends for this data over this time period for this use case and relationship. So specificity is key. And just to get a little bit meta, I want to shout out to DeepSeek for having the best headline for that slide. Context is king, queen, and crown. I wanted to say context is king, queen, and something, but I didn't know what to say. So I actually passed this to 7 different large language models using an app called Chorus, which is a desktop app that allows you to do exactly this with both open source and paid models. I asked it to fill in the blank for me. DeepSeek R1 was the best answer at the time. The next tip that we want to think about is how we want to write. You want to write like you would in Slack to your colleagues rather than how you would write in Google. It's a bit of a skill to unlearn this, but being able to talk more like you talk to a human is going to get you better results because these chat apps are optimized based on conversational data. They're optimized based on talking question and answer between people. And so being conversational will actually get you more results. And once you break the habit of turning things into, oh, this is how I talk to a computer, being how you talk to Google, it's actually a lot easier too. So instead of just saying like best bike wire cutter, give it some context like we did over here on the right. Telling it what you're trying to achieve, telling it what your budget is, telling it what you don't want, telling it what context you want it to account for. So talk like you would talk to a human being and you're almost certainly going to get better results. Potentially a human being that doesn't have much context. So maybe not a friend, but to somebody that you're working with for the first time, perhaps. And a note for a way to ease into this that I think is kind of a pro tip for getting comfortable with prompting is try using Perplexity instead of Google as your default quote unquote search engine. It's sort of a amalgam of the two, bringing together the ChatGPT experience and the Google experience with the view of, okay, you want to find results, but you also want to read a summary. Those summaries tend to be much better than what Google produces, and it responds really well to these conversational prompts. But if you accidentally fall back into the old habit of writing like you do on Google, you're still going to get a good result. So highly recommend trying that out. Maybe set it as your browser default for a week and see how you go. I did that a while back and never looked back. The only time I go to Google now is when I want to search for images or find a link to a website specifically, and I don't actually care about getting a summary of the content. I just want a link directly there. All right, next tip, make clear what you want and how you want it formatted. So being specific is a general theme, and in this case, it's being specific about how you want the result to be conveyed back. So AI assistants are pretty great if you tell them what you want, and it's getting better all the time. So tell it exactly what you want. Instead of just asking for 5 examples, I asked for 5 examples that one example of bad and one example of good side by side in a table. Then that actually gave me 5 results that allows us to see a demonstration of this purpose. So rather than asking just to summarize an article, ask it to give you a 5-bullet summary. Instead of asking it to explain a topic, ask specifically for it to explain that topic at a certain level for a certain audience in 3 short paragraphs. And so speaking of numbers, you don't just have to ask for one answer. One of the easiest ways to skip a few steps is to ask for multiple options and then pick your favorite from. It's wonderful that AI is infinitely patient. You can ask for as many options as you want. If you ask for too many, things tend to get a little bit sideways, but if you ask for enough options that you would actually want to read them. And so I mentioned before that you want to have a conversation, but if you know that you want 5 options so you can pick the best, ask for that up front. You can incorporate that as context. That's not going against being conversational. It's just providing specificity. And so with that, I was able to make a meme without even having to think about it. And the first 3 or 4 results were pretty terrible. And the one that we ended up here with, I think, is pretty good. Unsurprisingly, AI is pretty good at working with languages. It's good with manipulating words. And so you want to use language to push it in the direction that you want. Even if you don't know exactly what that's going to mean, exactly what's going to happen, or how you would do that yourself, try it and see how you go. Ask it to transform, reformat, synthesize. You can change what audience it's for. You can ask it to be 100 times more specific. What does that even mean? Who knows? But it tends to work. You can ask for things to be weirder. You can combine different ideas. You can break things up. You can merge them together. And you can change the tone and style of what you're trying to say. It works really well in combination with that create multiple options. You ask for 20 ideas and then you tell it which 5 are your favorite and ask for 10 more that are more like the ones that you preferred. Zoom in and break down the task. If you try and do too much all at once with a person, they're going to get overwhelmed. If you ask somebody to work on something for a year without checking in, chances are you're going to end up with a bad result at the end unless you were really, really lucky up front and said exactly what you want. That same principle applies. It's just, what is the time horizon? It's actually a way that a lot of people are starting to talk about AI intelligence and the movement towards AGI, artificial general intelligence, is how long can you leave the AI running without having to worry about it and be confident that you're going to get results back? At the moment, in August of 2025, we're circling up on 20 or 30 minutes, which is not particularly long, but it's come a long way from 1 minute at most where we were just a few years ago. And so when you run into that challenge where, okay, it's going to get lost if you leave it to go, and the easiest way to find this out is trial and error. You see it go and mess around with a task and come back with something that just makes no sense. Try breaking it down into smaller tasks. Decompose the bigger task into smaller ones, and then divvy those up and go through them one at a time. So instead of asking for it to come up with all the content for a slide like this one, pick the GIF, pick the headline, pick the subheadline, give an example. Instead of trying to do that all in one go, give it the context of what you're trying to do and ask just for the title. Then ask for a subtitle. Then ask for the keywords that would help you find a related GIF. Then ask for the worked example. So breaking it up into just those 4 prompts conversationally means you can get to a better result. It also makes it easier if you want to test and iterate along the way. Giving examples of what good looks like. We can only do so much to explain what we want in writing. And the best way to add more color to that, the equivalent of a picture is worth 1,000 words, is to give an example or multiple examples. If you can take an example of what you're looking for, you're going to implicitly drive the AI in the direction that you want it to go. Not only is this intuitive in the way that it would work for a person where you provide an example of what you're looking for, you're going to get a better result back almost certainly, but also in the context of a large language model, just mathematically, there's also a number of reasons that this works really well because it kind of fires up the part of the model in that giant, shallow knowledge of the world. It lights up the parts that are related to what you're looking for. So you're actually priming it and warming it up to go in the direction that you want it to go. And so this can be one shot or few shot prompting. 0 shot is where you provide no examples, and few shot is where you provide a few. 1 shot is where you provide one. And the difference between 1 shot and 0 shot is pretty substantial. So even just a single example will go a long way. If you've kind of heard some of this like best practices stuff around prompting and that sort of thing before, you may have heard that providing a single example can actually result in the model over focusing on that thing and just giving you overly specific and similar results to what you provided to the point where it's actually detrimental. Thankfully, in the past year or so, models have gotten a lot better thanks to the training of the different frontier labs. And that's not really an issue anymore. So you don't really need to worry about that, except if you're maybe working with an open source or smaller model where you may run into that. But if you're working in that context, you likely know that that's kind of part of the path of the course. But one example is safe. And so in this case, you want to ask for a subtitle for a slide. Instead of just straight asking for the subtitle, give it the subtitle of the other slides you've already made directly there for reference. And that will get you a better result. You get something here on the left that I certainly would never use as a title versus something over here on the right that is actually something that's quite usable. I didn't use it here because I was trying to add in a couple of extra things, but it gives you something that's actually workable without having to be specific about the shape or style or structure. It just kind of gives an implicit understanding of the type of language and structure that you're using in the context that you have. So that's an overview of the key things that I think are the top techniques to have in mind in a conversational prompting context. But eventually you will hit a dead end. Not everything is going to work. We're not at AGI yet. We don't have perfectly intelligent models. And so sometimes you're going to hit a dead end. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a playbook or flowchart more specifically that could help you get unstuck anytime that happens. So 3 things to keep in mind. Firstly, you can add more context. Just think a little about, well, what else could the model know in order to better serve what I need? What can you just dump out of your head? It doesn't have to be perfectly well formatted. Just type in the things that you can think about that are relevant to the scenario that you maybe hadn't shared yet. The second option is to start a new chat. Sometimes when you go through a conversational flow, you can start to end up with a lot of things that are irrelevant and that are incorrect. And the fact that there's all these incorrect things, even though you're correcting it along the way, starts to bias it in the direction of the error because it's seen it mentioned so many times. Yes, it's mentioned not to do that, but it can still take it in that direction to start thinking about it. Sort of in the same way of like when you tell somebody, don't think of a purple elephant, and then right now you're visualizing a purple elephant, right? In a similar way, large language models can get that a little bit from a mathematical perspective, as you say, not to do something that showed up randomly as an error in its first attempt. By talking about that a bunch, you are guiding it, which often can work, but sometimes you just hit a wall. And the best way to address that is to just start a new chat and take another shot at it. And then thirdly, you can try another model. Sometimes I'll find myself doing this instead of doing the new chat first, if I'm really just like not getting something that I like. So trying another model. As I mentioned before, there's lots of AI assistants to choose from. They all have free tiers that are quite generous and they get better all the time. And depending on the context, that free tier is more than enough for lots of things. So try Grok if you want something that is a little bit more creative. Try Claude if you want something that's better written and that flows better and is more narrative. You've got a lot of tools at your disposal. Just try another one and see where you get to. Sometimes I'll even do this right from the start. From the very beginning, I'll put things in 2 models side by side and see what I end up with, and I can pick and choose whatever's the best, which makes a lot of sense when you're doing a lot of content, when you're creating something that's really substantial. For something that's a little quicker, it's often best to try. It doesn't work, then you can try something else. But if it's a really important piece of work, something more substantial, more strategic, starting out with multiple models is a great pro tip that I'm including as an extra here as a bonus. Unplanned. As a reminder, these are the top tips that I have, the 8 techniques to keep in mind. Have a conversation, constantly think about context, write like Slack, not like Google. Be specific about what it is that you want. Ask for multiple answers and pick the best, and use language to convey what you want, even if it doesn't make logical sense. Break things down if you get stuck and give examples of what you want.